And let's just first talk about what the ADL is. Let's just talk about who they are and where they come from. They're called the Anti-Defamation League. They're a league that is against the defamation. Defamation of who? Defamation in general? Of what? Of who? They were created and they're explicitly born of the international Jewish community, part and parcel of the Jewish community. They're considered a Jewish group and a constituent member of the Organization of Major American Groups.
I am not a fan of the pro-foreign lobby. Doesn't matter, Israel, AIPAC, whatever you tell me, any China, I don't care. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to see the money over there anymore. I'm done. We need to move on. This needs to stop.
And let's just first talk about what the ADL is. Let's just talk about who they are and where they come from. They're called the Anti-Defamation League, which is a bit vague. And a bit strange also. Many groups, they sort of contain the fundamental conceit in their name. The Republican Jewish Coalition, the RJC, is a coalition of Republican Jews. And AIPAC, American Israel Public Affairs Committee, is a public affairs committee that is in favor of the U.S.-Israel relationship. It's right there in the name. Anti-Defamation League. They're a league that is against the defamation. Defamation of who? Defamation in general? Of what? Of who? They were created because of the accusations against an American Jew by the name of Leo Frank, who was accused of raping and murdering a little girl in America. And this is a time of many charges like this against Jews, like the Dreyfus affair in France, Leo Frank affair in the United States, where Jews, like blacks and like other minority groups, were being accused of things. And those respective communities claimed that this constituted a defamation. The charges against Jews or blacks or other marginalized groups constituted a form of defamation. That's what they said. I'm not saying that. That's what they said. That's where the name comes from. They said Leo Frank was defamed as a killer, pedophile, rapist because he was Jewish. That was a defamation of Jews as a group because they're marginal. In the same way that blacks are defamed, in the same way that other ethnic, racial, religious minorities were attacked on the basis of their minority status, they're being defamed as criminals, rapists.
You know, I do have a question. I want to know, and I just want to get a popular vote in the comments down below. Do you think the ADL was created to protect Jewish and Jewish people only? Let me know what you think down below.
Murderers, whatever. Of course, Leo Frank was most likely guilty, but that is where the name comes from. So the Anti-Defamation League is born, and it is a subsidiary of the B'nai B'rith, which is an international Jewish society. It's a Jewish group. But Jewish is not in the name. It is a Jewish group. And if you read their mission statement, it says that they're dedicated specifically to fighting anti-Semitism, building up the Jewish community, and defending Israel. And they're explicitly born of the international Jewish community, part and parcel of the Jewish community. They're considered a Jewish group and a constituent member of the Organization of Major American Groups. Okay? That's what the ADL is. Now, let's also consider the context. You have a lot of Jews in America. Where did they come from? As we all know, Jews started pouring into America in the late 19th and early 20th century through Ellis Island from Eastern Europe. They were segregated. They were persecuted. There were pogroms in Russia. There was the Pale of Settlement. They were separated from everybody, and they were poor. So they came to America, like the Slavs, like the Southern Europeans. That's where they came from. And during this time, there was a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment. There was a lot of racist sentiment against all the immigrants, against the Jews, against the Italians, against the Irish, against blacks. This era of Jim Crow, this is the era of the Ellis Islanders versus the nativists. And at this time, there was legal discrimination against the Jews. They were kept out of universities with quotas. They were excluded from other organizations, fraternal organizations, other parts of elite society. Why does this matter? Jews were an alien element. They were outsiders. And unlike the Italians or the Irish, they could not assimilate with the native whites because they weren't Christians.
The thing is, it's kind of strange how everywhere they go all around the world, they get outcasted. Typically, that's a signature of something more than what they want to be known for. And it's not, I'm not saying that's the case. Excuse me, I'm not saying that's the case, but you got to look at things as it is. I mean, if it's like this over thousands of years, they continuously do these things that are untrustworthy, that go in and just do whatever they want. Who's to say that we're not their next target and they're just getting smarter?
Like them, and they weren't ethnically European like them, or not considered that way. So the Jewish experience in America is that they became very liberal. They come from Russia, and many of them have socialist ideals, progressive, left-wing ideals. They're pro-union. And they're in favor of liberal universalism, the idea that they are just as American as anybody. Because they say that being American is not about being English or Anglo. It's not even about being European. It's not even about being Christian. They start to say that we're as American as anybody, even though we're ethnically and religiously Jewish, because of the values we all share. And that's the real beauty of America. They say the real beauty of America is that we're a rich melting pot where all these people from around the world can come together and we all become part of America with shared values. A Jewish playwright named Israel Zangwill, he came up with that idea. Melting pot comes from him. Those are his words. So as a marginal group facing discrimination, legal and real discrimination, they start to identify as liberal, left-wing, socialist, universalist, and they start to identify with the civil rights cause. And in the 1950s and 1960s, the ADL and other left-wing Jews are leading the charge in the civil rights movement. They're partnering with the NAACP. They're partnering with the black civil rights activists, giving them legal representation, fighting for them in politics. Why? Because these Jewish leftists, these immigrant Jewish communities, they understand that a rising tide lifts all boats. In other words, the more civil rights, the more liberal, the more multicultural that America gets, the better it is for them. If the legal standard is that there's no discrimination, no racism, if race is not even part of our society, then that's really good for them because it allows them to ascend.
If you haven't figured out that there's a much grander scheme here, there's a much bigger plan. We're just not let in on it. We're not privy to it. We're the plebs, right? We're the peasants. So keep your eyes peeled on whatever's happening now, because I feel like something massive is happening right in this moment. There's a reason why there's all this chaos and commotion, right?
No quotas at Harvard, no quotas at General Electric, no quotas or restrictions at the country club. It gives them more opportunities, more rights, more access. So they find a common cause with immigrants in general, with American blacks, with even Muslims for that matter later on, with all these other communities. That's why Jews are so left. That's why like 80% of American Jews are left. That's why Jews are behind so many of the left-wing causes. Whether it's women's rights, civil rights, gay rights, that's why and there's other reasons too, but that is a big reason why they're behind a lot of it. Because liberal universalism is essential to them having privileges and opportunities and rights in America. They have this political interest in redefining what America is. And that's where the ADL comes from. Now in 2015, the ADL gets a new president, Jonathan Greenblatt. He's from the Obama administration. But as we know, the Obama administration is very progressive. And it's made up of these really militant progressives from the 60s and 70s. These guys are communists. They're from Nation of Islam. They're black nationalists. Many of them believe in liberation theology. They're radical communists. And around the same time, in the 60s and 70s, the international left starts to see Israel as a racist state. They start to see Israel, to the extent that it was aligning with the United States, as capitalist, because it was becoming capitalist, as racist, as nationalist. And so these radical progressives, even many of them Jews, start to hate on Israel. An Obama admin official becomes part of the ADL in 2015. And all of a sudden, the ADL is perceived by many pro-Israel Jews as getting too close to this progressive left that hates Israel. The ADL forgives Ilhan Omar for saying it's all about the Benjamins. The ADL under Greenblatt is very tight with the Democratic Party, which is being run by Obama and all of his people, who the pro-Israel Jews in America consider to be Israel haters. They think that Obama is a Jew hater. They think Obama's an Israel hater. They think that the United Nations is out to get Israel. Amnesty International's out to get Israel. They think that the far left, the progressives, are out to get Israel. And they say the radical left has taken over the Democratic Party. And so there begins to be this intra within Jewish battle between the pro-Israel Jews and the ADL. And you see this all over the place. Ben Shapiro hates Greenblatt and what the ADL has become. You have people like Joel Pollack, the editor at Breitbart. He says the same thing. You've got Ezra Levant. He was on InfoWars today, said if all the Jews were like the ADL and Shmuley, I would hate the Jews too because they're so left-wing. But let's think about this for a second. Why do we oppose the ADL? Why do we oppose the Jewish left? We oppose the ADL and the Jewish left because we believe that America is particular. It's not a melting pot. That's not what makes America great. We believe that America has a distinct identity rooted in its European heritage, that it's white, that it's Christian, and our American culture proceeds from our Christian heritage and our European heritage, and in some sense, our European genetics.
What I really believe is that they're trying to muddy the waters of the American culture. They're trying to bring in all these different cultures to mix and just dilute what we have here in the good old USA. And if you live here and you've lived around the world, around the country, rather, like I have, all the way to the deep South in Memphis, Tennessee, to Nashville, to Wilmington, North Carolina, up into Appalachian and Boone, North Carolina, down to Miami, Florida, and then, you know, all over here in the California West Coast. And I've seen it all. I've been all over the country except for, you know, like Washington. I've been in Ohio. This is America. And all across the country, for the most part, it's very similar. Once you start assimilating all of these different cultural identities inside of this very American populace, things will radically get very interesting. I can assure you of that.
So we believe that that's what America is. And they're not the same racially. They don't share our religion. In many ways, they don't share the same values. They're like socialists and communists. We're saying, no, you can't redefine what America is. You can't come here and tell us what our country is. Our country is one thing, and you know, you can try and force yourself into it, but you're never going to change what America is. This is the tension between the white right and the ADL, the Christian identity movement and the ADL. This is why the ADL hates the far right. Because the far right, to the extent that it's made up of traditionalists, traditional Christians, traditional Americans, white identitarians, we're trying to preserve America. And we're saying that what America is white and Christian. And the ADL, to the extent that they're an advocate for the Jews and the marginalized immigrant Jews and all the other marginalized racial, ethnic, religious minorities, the ADL is saying, no, that's an extremist viewpoint. America's for everybody. It's not just for whites. It was never for whites. It's not just for Christians. It's for everybody. And this is why the ADL is working to make America less white and less Christian. Because the less white and less Christian it is, the weaker that claim will become that America is or should be or ever was white and Christian. This is why the ADL is set against the far right. And that's why the ADL is branding white identitarians, Christian nationalists, and critics of Israel as hateful, fanatics, extremists, and is seeking to get them censored and banned and destroyed and their reputations and lives ruined. That is our opposition to the ADL. That's why the ADL considers us to be beyond the pale. Because for 100 years, they have been advocates for a multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic, religiously pluralistic American society on behalf of the immigrant Jews, on behalf of the eternal wanderers, those that are not assimilable. And to the extent that they're speaking on behalf of blacks and Muslims and gays and women, it's again because a rising tide lifts all boats. They want to push back in as broad a possible way a united front against the dominant white Christian majority, which has the ability to keep all those groups down. But here's the rub. So the ADL is kicked out of the FBI, and they're forced to destroy their hate glossary. But this development is being celebrated by Jews. I'll give you a quick list of them. A group called Beitar USA celebrated the announcement. This was their tweet about it. They said, quote, "Today we note with satisfaction that the ADL has removed its so-called glossary of hate, which listed Beitar as the only Jewish radical extremist hate group. We were placed alongside groups like Turning Point and others, a company that further exposed the ADL's bias. It is shameful and reprehensible that the ADL ever labeled Beitar, one of the world's leading Zionist movements, a hate organization. In truth, the ADL is a radical left-wing woke organization that opposes strong Zionism and fuels division and hate in America and worldwide. We agree with Elon Musk. The ADL is a hate group. At the World Zionist Congress, we will advance resolutions to formally declare the ADL a radical hate group hostile to the state of Israel." Founded by Zeev Jabotinsky in 1923, Beitar has stood proudly for Jewish pride, Zionism, and self-defense for more than a century. So how do you explain this then? The ADL is a Jewish group in defense of the Jews against defamation, legal restrictions, quotas, etc. But other Jewish groups are calling the ADL anti-Israel, hostile to Israel, labeling Israeli Jewish groups as hateful. How do you make sense of this? Well, it basically comes from within the Jewish community, two ideas of how the Jews are going to survive in a world that hates them. And that's their perception. Two competing ideas.
This is biblical, by the way. It is. I mean, when we get to the point where, and I'm not some biblical scholar, and I should be better about reading my Bible, truthfully, but I mean, this is in the Bible saying that Jews will be hated by everybody, the whole world. And that's kind of when the revelation is supposed to be prophesied. So kind of interesting where we're at right now on the timeline.
There are Jews in America that say, look, we like America. We want to live in America. We want to live in Europe. And yeah, we want to live in Israel too. And in order for the world to be safe for Jews, we need the whole world to embrace this liberal universalist ideology. How can we inoculate the world against anti-Semitism? What's the solution to the Jewish question? We have to make the whole world post-racial, liberal, religiously tolerant, because if the whole world, led by the United States, shares these global values, then we will be safe, we can ascend, we can protect ourselves through the legal process. That is how we can be safe. But the Zionists, in particular the religious Zionists, the revisionist Zionists, they have an altogether different opinion. They have a very skeptical view of the world. They say the world is always going to hate us. Any liberal consensus is only short-lived. Eventually, on a long enough timeline, they're going to try and kill us again or persecute us again. They believe the only way for Jews to be safe is for them to have a strong country, for them to have their own country in the Middle East, for them to have nuclear weapons, a powerful military, a big in terms of population and landmass, a big, strong, powerful country, a country defined as a Jewish nation, an ethno-state, a country of, by, for Jews, a powerful country. And that's the only way we're ever going to be safe, is to be nationalistic and muscular. Now, you are starting maybe to see the tension because there's a contradiction. They can't really do both. Because in order for Israel to be strong and powerful, they have to embrace a particular Jewish identity to the exclusion of all the others. The Israeli government has to say, this is a place for Jews, only for Jews. This is a Jewish nation. It's not a liberal nation for everybody. It's a nation for Jews, by Jews, for Jews, Jewish values, ethnic Jews. That's who it's for. And we're going to kick everybody else out. And if you're not on board with that, we're going to kick you out.
Hey, there's got to be something to be said about that. The loyalty of the Jewish people is unparalleled. You can't match it. There's no loyalty here in the U.S. It's so hard to get any loyalty even amongst a friend group. Imagine a whole nation of people, but they are loyal to a fault, staunch. That's what it takes to take over the world. We must be careful. We must pay attention.
And we're going to violently and aggressively pursue our interests, like in the West Bank, like in Gaza. We're going to push you out. We're going to take more land. We're going to bomb our neighbors. We're going to make you submit to us. Meanwhile, in America, the ADL is saying America's for everybody. America's liberal. We don't agree with the particularism like that. We don't agree with ethno-nationalism. There's this tension. And that is why many of these pro-Israel groups are so happy the ADL is receding. That's why they're calling them woke, because in their own words, they say the ADL is hurting strong Zionism. And why do you think that is? It's because the American left and even the European left, they're backing the Israeli left. The Israeli left that wants to make Israel left-wing like America, liberal like America. It's a division that runs through American Jewry and Israel also. And there's even a big debate about this in a forum for Jewish organizations. This is a story from the Times of Israel in 2018. It says, quote, last year, the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations updated its secret rules to ban insults, ad hominem attacks, and name-calling among member organizations and instituted a special committee to consider complaints in strictest confidence. The committee met to hear complaints. All parties agreed. The session, all parties agreed, devolved into insults, attacks, name-calling. 3 U.S. Jewish organizations, the National Council of Jewish Women, the ADL, and the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, accused the Zionist Organization of America of inappropriately criticizing them. The ZOA filed complaints against member groups that have yet to be scheduled for hearings. The complaints range from differences about who is responsible for anti-Zionist signs at rallies to intimations of corrupt intent to allegations of violence. Jewish politics is nasty, but rarely is the infighting in public. The charges and countercharges demonstrate the ways that ZOA President Morton Klein gets under his colleagues' skin. So you have 3 liberal Jewish organizations, the Organization for Jewish Women, the ADL, and the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, fighting with the Zionist Organization of America. And the basis of the fight is that the liberal Jewish organizations are soft on progressives that hate Israel. And they're too tough on pro-Israel groups that they call racist or nationalistic or xenophobic. The pro-Israel right wing in America and in Israel hates the American Jewish left because they say that the Jewish left is not pro-Israel enough. They don't recognize the threat the Palestinians pose to Israel. They're trying to destroy Israel by opening up Israeli society to Arabs, Muslims, and foreigners. And that is the basis of the tension within Jewish politics. And they're talking about this openly. Ben Shapiro has said, my problem with the ADL is that it's become a partisan left-wing group and hospitable to Jew haters like Ilhan Omar and too tough on pro-Israel guys like myself, Shapiro says. Joel Pollack said, the ADL used to be good, but now they're calling everybody that's right-wing anti-Israel, and they're failing to isolate the real haters of Israel, like Nick Fuentes, like all these other guys. So in other words, let's summarize here. We, the white right, those that are in favor of a white America, we, the Christian nationalist movement that's in favor of a Christian country, Christian values, we are Christian, those that are critical of Israel's influence in politics, we are against the ADL because the ADL, as a pro-Jewish group, is trying to redefine American identity to make it safer and more hospitable for their own group, and because they represent Israel influencing our country. And on that basis, they're censoring, suppressing, fighting against traditional Americans, traditional white America, Christian America, independent from Israel. But these people like Ezra Levant, Ben Shapiro, Mort Klein, they hate the ADL because they say the ADL is too friendly to the new anti-Semites on the far left and too critical of the most extreme right-wing Israelis and the Netanyahu government in Israel. So our criticisms of the ADL and the right wing of American Jewry, their criticism of the ADL are two different things. Now, why does this matter? Because the ADL is not going to be vanquished here. What is most likely going to happen is that Jonathan Greenblatt will be fired and replaced with a more pro-Israel president. I'm sure that the constituent members of the ADL's board or its donors, they're going to say, look, you're ruining the ADL. The ADL used to be all powerful. You're ruining it. We need to get somebody in that's not a leftist, that's not from the Obama admin, that's not with the institutional left wing in America. So that might be one of the things that happens. The other thing that has already happened is that the ADL is being replaced with a different species of Jewish organization. What are they? I'll give you examples. Beitar is one of them. Beitar was founded by Zeev Jabotinsky, and Beitar has been working with the U.S. State Department. This is a Jewish group born in Israel. They were terrorists in the pre-Israeli independence mandate of Palestine. They're working with the U.S. State Department to make lists of anti-Israel college students to be deported. So you get 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. You get the ADL working with the FBI, or you get Beitar working with the State Department. You get the ADL directing the FBI to attack white supremacists and racists, or you get Beitar to direct the State Department to deport the pro-Palestine guys, the Muslims. Canary Mission is another. Canary Mission creates lists of students that have protested Israel in favor of Palestine. They're running those names up the flagpole to get them deported. Canary Mission is an Israeli outfit. Beitar is an Israeli outfit. They have a line to Marco Rubio because Rubio is supported by pro-Israel Jews like Miriam Adelson, who's in bed with the Republican Party. It's a different faction.
If you haven't seen the video on Miriam Adelson, I'll put the link in right here. I mean, it's insane. I'll put the link in the description. You guys, Miriam Adelson, oh my goodness.
Now, I would say that on net, it is probably a good development. Kicking out the ADL, look, the ADL was suppressing white nationalists, white identity, Christian nationalism, the far right. They were doing that in an ideologically liberal way. These are part of the American left. These right-wing Zionist organizations, they're really going in more on the third worldists, the Muslims, the progressives, the far left, that is specifically hating on Israel. The far right sometimes hates on Israel. A lot of the far right is quietist about Israel. Guys like Jared Taylor, Peter Brimelow, they don't talk about Israel. The Bronze Age Pervert Network, they're sort of white nationalist, but pro-Israel. So groups like Beitar and Canary Mission are going to leave those guys alone. Now, it's then a question of, is it better to have the ADL target Israel critics and the entire far right, or Israeli organizations They're going to leave the far right alone and only go after the Israel critics on the far right and on the far left. That's an open question. Is it better? I think in some sense. In another sense, it only makes them more precise. And that's where we need to be careful. Because what they really want is for the ADL to become more precise and only attack the true adversaries of Israel. And I don't know that that's a good thing. There's a consensus right now that wokeism is bad. It's gone too far. There's a consensus now that immigration needs to stop. Blacks are out of control.
Now, the wokeism thing it has gone too far. And I think we've started to snap out of the whole LGBTQ taking over the world thing.
It's a consensus. All this left-wing stuff has gone too far. Even that Israel's gone too far. And there's a general climate of free speech. Now, if the ADL is reorganized and they become more precise and they say, you know what, you're right, we went too far. Turning Point's not anti-Semitic. They're not haters. But if they say Nick Fuentes is, and that guy's got to go, then there might be a new consensus that isolates the only people that are actually against Israel. And you have a general climate of free speech that very quickly becomes a little less general. And people think we have free speech, but in reality, the so-called real anti-Semites are being precisely targeted with laser precision, and they're being punished. And no one's going to talk about it because they'll say, yeah, well, the ADL used to go too far. Now they're focusing on the right guys, and that's a good thing. And mark my words, that's what Shapiro, Pollack, that's what they're all saying. They're saying we're not against the ADL censoring people. Even Kash Patel. Kash Patel said they're political, masquerading as a watchdog group. And inside of that is a tacit statement that watchdog organizations are necessary, that we need Jewish watchdogs, but this isn't one of them. Or if it is, it's a bad one. So these are the nuances, okay? And a lot of people tell you the Jews are not a monolith. That's true. But one thing they're monolithic about is they're all in favor of their own collective interest ahead of ours. So they have these disputes, but they keep them in the family. At the end of the day, they literally all get together at conferences. They literally all get together at international congresses and conventions and conferences, and they debate what is good for us. How are we going to fight for our interest? How are we going to fight for what's best for Israel, what's best for Jews? And if that's the question you're asking, then you really shouldn't have power over Americans, because the only people that should have power over Americans are people that are saying what's best for Americans. And maybe the Jews can have a say. Maybe the Jews can petition the American government and say, hey, this is making us uncomfortable. I think that's their right. They're human beings like us, and they exist in America, and they're not going anywhere, and they exist in Israel, but they cannot have that final say. They cannot have that authority. They have too much power. That's my problem. They have too much power. We need to take the power from them. And it doesn't mean we're going to hurt them. It doesn't mean we're going to be cruel towards them. It doesn't even mean we're not going to listen to them. But it means they just can't have that final say. They can petition for their grievances like every other minority group, like every other special interest. Special interests have a place in America. We want to hear from, let's say, black people. Black people are a distinct part of America. They're distinct from the rest. So are the Jews. So are, in a sense, Catholics. They should petition an all-American, all-Christian government about their grievances. They should not have the veto power over who gets a Twitter account, who gets to exercise their right to speak freely, who gets to hold or run for office, and all the rest of it. So, anyway. So, 2 cheers for the ADL's disempowerment. It is unambiguously, in my opinion, a good thing, but mixed feelings about it. You should see it as a red flag that pro-Israel guys are cheering this on, because it only means they're going to get replaced by a pro-Israel group as opposed to a Jewish leftist group. But they're not that different.
So you've been following this channel, then you already know. I am not a fan of the pro-foreign lobby. Doesn't matter, Israel, APAC, whatever you tell me, any China, I don't care. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to see the money over there anymore. I'm done. We need to move on. This needs to stop. Otherwise, we are going to see the terminal end of the United States as we ever knew it. Because right now, Gen Z, they don't know what that was. I barely remember it. When gas was like 90 cents at Costco back in the 90s, I remember the United States was different. I bet you do too. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. I'll see you in the next one.
AP on the beat.
They call me Danks on lock. Yeah.